This lecture is part of a series of lectures on modular forms and will be about modular functions, which you recall are just the modular forms of weight 0. In other words, they're functions on the upper half plane such that f of a tau plus b over c tau plus d is equal to f of tau whenever a, b, c, d is a 2 by 2 matrix of determinant 1. And the problem we want to do is to find all meromorphic modular functions. So meromorphic means on the upper half plane and at I infinity. So you remember it's meromorphic at I infinity if it's meromorphic if it's as a function of q equals e to the 2 pi I tau at q equals 0. Last lecture we classified the modular forms that were holomorphic on H and at I infinity, and we saw they were all polynomials in the Eisenstein series E4 and E6, which are weight 4 and weight 6. Now you can get a modular function by taking a quotient of two modular forms of the same weight. So we want to find two linearly independent modular forms of the same weight, because if they're linearly, if they're multiples of each other, then the quotient is just a constant. And last time we saw that the space of modular forms was dimension at most 1 until you got up to weight 12. So for weight 12, we had a two-dimensional space of modular forms spanned by E4 cubed and E6 squared. And what we would really like is a modular form of weight 12 that doesn't have any zeros in the upper half plane. And if we take E4 cubed minus E6 squared, then this has a 0 at I infinity, and the number of zeros in a fundamental domain is the weight over 12, which is 1 in this case, so this is no other zeros in H. And we're going to divide it by 1728 because that makes its coefficients co-prime integers, as we'll see later, and we call this the discriminant. So here we have a modular form of weight 12 with no zeros on H. And now we recall that we defined the elliptic modular function j of tau to be E4 of tau cubed divided by delta of tau. And let's write down some obvious properties of J. First of all, it's holomorphic on the upper half plane H, and it's got a pole of order 1 at I infinity, because delta has a 0 of order 1 at I infinity. We can also work out its values at various points. So it's got a 0 of order 3 at the cube root of unity omega and all its conjugates under SL2. That's because E4 has a 0 of order 1 at this point, as we saw. We can also work out its value at I. So j of tau minus 1728 has a 0 of order 2 at I. And that's essentially because E6 has a 0 of order 1 at I, and if you look at the formula for j, you see that it's equal to 1728 and sort of has a double 0 there. We can also work out its Fourier expansion, which you remember we did earlier, and is q to the minus 1 plus 744 plus 196884 q, and so on. So we get these surprisingly large coefficients. So what we want to prove now is the following result. Any meromorphic modular function is a rational function of j. In other words, it's of the form p of j of tau divided by q of j of tau, where p and q are just polynomials with complex coefficients. So how do we prove this? So suppose f is a meromorphic modular function. Then what we do is, first of all, we get rid of the poles of f on the upper half plane h. And that's quite easy to do because we can just multiply by j of tau minus j of tau 0. And this has a 0 at tau equals tau 0, so it can be used to kill off poles at tau 0. And so we can do that and kill off all the finite number of poles in a fundamental domain, and since everything is invariant under SL2, that will kill off all poles in the upper half plane. So now we know f is holomorphic on h, the upper half plane, but might have a pole at I infinity. So f of tau might look like, say, a minus n q to the minus n plus various terms. So if it has a pole of order n at I infinity, its Fourier expansion would look like that. And then what we do is we make this a bit better by taking f of tau minus a minus n times j of tau to the n. So we just subtract the nth power of j, which has a pole of order 1, and this is going to be equal to something times q to the 1 minus n, and so on. So we've made the pole not so bad. So we can repeat until we get f has a 0 at I infinity. And as we saw, this means that f is a modular form of weight 0 that's holomorphic and has a 0 to I infinity. And as we saw last lecture, this just reduces to the case f equals 0, which is rather obviously a rational function of tau. So we see in particular that if f is holomorphic on the upper half plane, then it's a polynomial in j of tau, and that will also be kind of useful later. This also shows that j is the simplest modular function. So if you look at j, it looks terribly complicated. Its definition looks rather weird, and its Fourier series expansion has all these huge coefficients 1, 9, 6, 8, 8, 4, and it certainly doesn't look all that simple, but it really is the simplest. So we've seen that the field of modular functions is just the field of rational functions in j, and the only other modular functions generating that are things of the form aj plus b over cj plus d for a, b, c and d complex numbers. And now if we want this function to be holomorphic on h, the only possibilities are going to be aj plus b. So, well, we want the polar to I infinity to have residue 1, so we set a equals 1, and then we see that j is actually determined by these conditions up to addition of a constant. So it really is the simplest modular function. This coefficient 1, 9, 6, 8, 8, 4 and so on wasn't just there because we were incompetent and missed an easier solution. That really is the simplest number we could have there. So it's really rather bizarre, because what we're saying is that we're looking at functions such that f of tau equals f of tau plus 1, and this is equal to f of minus 1 over tau. And these look like some reasonably simple functional equations, and I just find it really bizarre that hidden inside these is the number 196884 as the first non-trivial coefficient of the simplest function with these properties. I don't know. I mean, where's the number 196884 hiding in these equations? I don't really know. So that classifies modular functions. What I'm going to do now is to give a slightly weird application of modular functions to Picard's theorem. So Picard's theorem says the following. So suppose f is holomorphic on the upper half, not on the upper half plane, on the whole of the complex numbers. and suppose f is not equal to a constant. And we can ask, what values does f take? So what are the values of f? Well, it might take all complex numbers, but it might miss out some. So f can miss out one complex number. In other words, there may be one complex number not equal to f. For instance, if we take f equals e to the z, this misses out the value 0, because e to the z can never be 0. And now we have the following problem. Can f omit two values? And the answer is no. So in other words, if we've got a holomorphic function that's not constant, then either the equation f of z equals 0 or the equation f of z equals 1 must have a solution. And so this question seems to have absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with modular functions. And the shortest proof of it uses modular functions. And this is sort of an example of how modular functions turn up in all sorts of unexpected places. And whenever they do, they give very short magical solutions to something. So what we're going to do is to use the modular function j. And first of all, I want to look at where the derivative of j is equal to 0. So this is just the derivative with respect to tau. And you notice that the derivative of j with respect to tau is actually a modular form of weight 2, because if you differentiate a modular form of weight 0, you always get a modular form of weight 2. I should say this is not holomorphic at I infinity, so it's not a holomorphic modular form. And let's check its zeros. Well, the number of zeros in a fundamental domain is 2 over 12, which is 1 over 6. And you've got to remember here we count poles as minus zeros. So a pole of order 1 means a 0 of order minus 1. And let's think about the zeros we know about. First of all, it's got a pole of order 1 at I infinity. And you can see this because j is q to the minus 1 plus something, and the derivative with respect to tau of q to the n is equal to 2 pi I n times q to the n. So the derivative of j still starts with minus q to the minus 1. And we also know about its zeros. So it's got zeros of order 2 at omega and omega plus 1. And that's because j has zeros of order 3 at these points. And it's got a 0 of order 1 at I. And that's because j minus 1728 has a 0 of order 2 at I. And you remember that omega and omega plus 1, only 1/6 of them lies in the fundamental domain. So this gives us 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 zeros from the points omega and omega plus 1. And similarly, the point I gives us half a 0. So altogether, we have found minus 1 0 at infinity, and we found a third of a 0 at omega, and a third of a 0 at omega plus 1, and half a 0 at I. And if we add these all up, we get 1/6. So we've accounted for all the zeros of the derivative of j. Its only zeros are at these points omega and I, and their conjugates under SL2Z. And now, let's think about this elliptic modular function j. It's a function from the upper half plane to the complex numbers. And let's look at its inverse. I don't mean 1 over j, I mean its inverse, as in arc sine or something like that. Well, this is going to be a sort of function from the upper half, from the complex numbers to the upper half plane, except it's sort of multi-valued. Because sometimes when you try and take the inverse of j, we get some sort of ambiguity. So it has branch points, that's j to the minus 1 has branch points wherever branch points at j of tau whenever the derivative of j of tau is equal to 0. And we can figure out what these branch points are because the j of tau has derivative 0 only at omega and I and all the conjugates under SL2Z. And j of tau at these points is always equal to 0 or 1728. So the inverse function of j has branch points at these 2.0 and 1728, and otherwise it behaves nicely if you don't mind it being multi-valued. And now suppose f is a function from the complex numbers to the complex numbers and is holomorphic. And suppose f of z is never equal to 0 or 1728. Then you notice that j to the minus 1 f of z is actually holomorphic, if you think about it a little bit, because you see f of z is avoiding the bad branch points of j to the minus 1, and f is defined in the simply connected domain C. And if you think about it a bit, you'll see that j to the minus 1 f of z is actually a well-defined single-valued holomorphic function, or at least you can make it into one without much difficulty. And it's a function from the complex numbers to the upper half plane. And now all we have to do is we take x of I times this, and this will always have absolute value less than 1 because if you multiply something in the upper half plane by I and take x with it, that is absolute value less than 1, so is bounded. So this means x of I j to the minus 1 f of z is constant, which obviously implies f of z must also be constant. So there's this, we've proved this, we've got this really bizarre proof of proving this quite general theorem about holomorphic functions that doesn't mention modular functions at all, and we've got a very short proof of it. You know, if we assume standard properties of the elliptic modular function, the proof is only about 2 lines long or something like that. Okay, so next lecture we're going to give some more examples of modular forms, either theta functions or the discriminant, depending on what I happen to feel like.